Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show on 94.7 The Pulse. Music, interviews, news, and, well, Two Blokes Chatting. Now, here are the two blokes.
Frankie and the boys, they're all 55 with a social documentary on the human habit of congregating in the safety of numbers. Who better to talk to about that song than the man himself, Frankie J. Holden? Welcome to the Two Blokes Chatting radio show.
Welcome, blokes. Thank you for having me on.
It's a very great pleasure. We have got a series. We've had enough people now that we've now got a series called Legends of Australian Music, and we'd like to dub you one of them to be part of that group.
Well, what an incredible honour. I feel humbled. I mean, that's a very... I could argue the point with you about whether or not legendary status is suitably bestowed upon me. Icon, I'd go with icon. But legends, I don't know.
Well, once you've been on the Two Blokes Chatting radio show, by definition, you now are.
Oh, that's right. That's tipped me over.
That's it.
There's a tipping point there.
Well, thanks for joining us. I know you're a busy man at the moment, so thanks for taking some time out. I guess the question that you always ask, sort of think about the first question. You got Neil, by the way. The other one's Rob. You've already spoken to.
G'day, Neil.
Are you a singer who acts, an actor who entertains, an entertainer who sings? How do you describe yourself?
That is a good question. And in fact, On the Prowl, when you listen to On the Prowl, which you do get an inkling of that, because I'll say this, no matter what you think of On the Prowl, I still love that song. I think it's a great single, and it still stands out for me every time I hear it. And particularly if it's on an Aussie rock compilation or something, it does jump out. It's just got great production, and it's got a great attitude. But I'll say this, there's not many Australian, I don't think there's ever been one other Australian hit records that in the middle of it has got a lecture on, the human habit of congregating in the safety of numbers, and then finishes with a John Wayne impersonation. So it's ridiculous now when you listen to it and you think, what the hell is that? But I guess looking back now, that both those instances just happened on the day when we were doing the lead vocals. It just popped into the idea popped into my head, and we kept them in. But I suppose, looking back in hindsight, that shows that there were other thoughts going on in my head, apart from just making the music. So I suppose an all-rounder, jack of all trades, master of none would be what I'd say.
Frankie, I'm asking this question because I genuinely don't know the answer, but I'm intrigued by it. For that very reason, that you've never really been a brilliant thing at anything. How did Frankie J. Holden start?
He's a very good caravan park owner. Don't worry about that.
Where and how was Frankie J. Holden born?
Okay. Well, I was a chartered accountant, but I was also, a keen surfer, and like all good surfers, we messed around on guitars. And I always, even during high school, I was part of the entertainment, if you like. I was famous within my high school, Cumberland High School at Parramatta, North Parramatta, and for doing impressions of the teachers, etc. And I was Romeo in Romeo and Juliet in Year 11, which we rewrote. So it had some great lines in it, some of which have stayed with me. I'll give you one now. Juliet, Juliet, I am here in my shoes of vinyl to take you to see the grand final. They just don't write them like that.
Now, that bloke, Shakespeare, was that his name? He could have learned a bit from you.
Yeah. How many times did he host Countdown?
Absolutely. Never got asked to do IMT.
So I was, an extrovert at high school and going through university, and me and a couple of mates put together a little band, and we went in a talent quest at a small leagues club in Sydney as a group, and we won the talent quest, much to everyone's surprise. And the prize was 4 Friday nights in a row doing a gig at a pub near Sydney University. And it was paid, like paid gig. And to us, that was unbelievable. We're getting paid to show off. So we went and did these gigs, and a couple of the boys who were putting Old 55 together were going to Sydney Uni. And they happened to see me in this pub. And they came back the next week, and they came back the following week. And eventually they said, we're putting this band together. Do you want to join us? And I initially said, nah, not really. I said, I'm just doing this for fun, and I'm actually a chartered accountant. And they said, well, we look like we've got a recording contract. So that was the trigger for me. I thought, I'll jump on this train and see where it goes. And that's how it happened. So then we started rehearsing. We rehearsed for a good 6 months. And then to come back to your original question, so then we had the band, we started the band, and then we decided that we would have larger-than-life stage characters, and we would be, dressed up and adopting characterizations for for our shows, and that we'd all have funny names. So there was Richard Jones in the band. He became Rock Pile. There was Drainpipe Plumber on the drums. There was Meatballs McPatrick on lead guitar. And then I started thinking about a name for myself, and I wanted it to be something iconically Australian. And so my first thought was actually Victor Lawnmower, which I'm sort of glad I didn't go with that in the end. But, I thought Holden, F.J. Holden, and then Frankie J. Holden. And that's how that came about. And then Wilbur, we did about 3 or 4 gigs before Wilbur found us and started playing with us. And it was a live gig, a live-to-air gig on Double J, as it was back then. It's now, of course, Triple J. But we were doing a live-to-air gig. It was only about maybe a 5th or 6th, maybe 10th gig. And we went around the band to introduce each other to the audience, and we realised that we didn't have a name for Wilbur. So I just turned to him and said, and on sax, what's your name? And he just sort of went off the top of his head, Wild. Wilbur Wild. like Bond, James Bond.
Yeah. And that hasn't stuck.
No, exactly. So that's the story of how Frankie J. Holden came into being. And then the band took off. Like a meteor, really.
Now, am I right in saying, now I could have completely made this up, or else I'm going to absolutely stagger Rob with this piece of information. Am I right in saying when you were still an accountant, you were working with a chap called Glenn Baker, who subsequently became pretty well known as Glenn A. Baker?
No, you're incorrect. So that's -5 points to you. Glenn was a public servant and working in the public service with Jeff Plummer, who was the drummer. And they became mates at work. And Glenn, of course, even back then had a phenomenal interest in and knowledge of music. And he had this, it was Glenn's idea to put together a 50s revival band, writing original songs and to call it Old 55. So he was, as I say, he was friends with Jeff, and Jeff said, I've got a band. And just a little band playing around Cronulla they were called Thanos. And so that's how that happened. So Thanos formed the basis of Old 55, and then they added myself and Wilbur to form the band that everybody knows as Old 55. Incidentally, the name Old 55 comes from a Tom Waits song.
Yes.
The song is called Old 55, and it was also recorded by the Eagles, and it's a beautiful song. So that was a very, very clever and imaginative piece of work by Glenn.
I'm going to suggest I should only lose 2 points, not 5. I thought it was pretty close.
Yeah, somewhere near it is not too bad. Hey, Frankie, the creative influence is interesting. We've had the privilege of some really big names, Russell Morris, Brian Cadd, Glenn Shrike, and there's a lot of Molly Meldrum in their story around the creative side. How did the creativity of the Old 55 work come together?
Well, we knew straight away that to have credibility, we'd have to be writing our own songs. And fortunately, Jim Manzi, who was the bass player, was and is a talented songwriter. And so the ideas for the songs came from anywhere. So let's talk about On the Prowl. The idea for that song came from stories that Wilbur used to tell us about his days hooning around East Ivanhoe in Melbourne, where he grew up, with his mates. And he had invented, in these stories, he'd embellished them, as is his wont. And he had a sort of imaginary characters and names in these stories. So that was how the idea for On the Prowl came about. And then, you know, who knows where ideas for songs come from. But we did put a lot of work into, you know, the presentation of the band. As I say, we'd adopted these characters. We got wardrobed in a character, and we did a lot of work on the live show. And we were a great live act. We were very, very energetic and fun and entertaining, and you know, nobody had seen anything like it really, because we had entertainment within the show, within the music set. You know, there were stories and gags. We used to do some ridiculous things. We used to form a human pyramid in the middle of a set with me and Wilbur and Jeff, the three burly blokes on the bottom, and Patrick up the top. And we had play-ons and play-offs, and we used AV back in the days when no one was doing that. So that made us perfect fodder for Countdown. And Countdown, you know, we have to give a lot of credit to Countdown, as do most Australian bands from that era, for giving us incredible exposure right from the get-go. And I can remember, you know, going on tour very early in the days, and the people knew the songs. You know, we'd be out back in the middle of nowhere somewhere, and they would know the songs, and that was all due to the exposure on Countdown. So we were a very theatrical act when you think back, and again, coming back to that On the Prowl thing, there are hints of that in that song with, you know, John Wayne making an impersonation. And there, on the album, we did little vignettes on the album Take It Greasy, which was our debut album. We did little vignettes before songs. Little characters would come on and speak, and then go into the song. And I think we always had in the back of our minds that we would translate the success of the band into either movies or some sort of TV show, you know, like a Monkey style show or something. We didn't really know what, but we did mess around with an idea for a film called Daydream Junior High. Daydream Junior High School is the high school referred to in Looking for an Echo, which is another big hit song we had. So there are all these plans to turn our music career into full-fledged, you know, movies and fully fledged entertainment careers. But of course, as often happens in rock and roll, amongst tears and recriminations, it all fell over.
Frankie, let's change tack, because you, right from the early days, you've described you're a bit of a show-off, and that's led to doors being opened for you. But I enjoy a bit of good dramatical television, and A Place to Call Home is some of the finest stuff I've seen on Australian television, and I was a little surprised to see you pop up into it. So tell us how you've gone from high school show-off to a pretty serious dramatic role in a great Australian production.
Well, back in the day, in the mid-'70s, when Old 55 were hitting their peak, there were all of these TV shows, variety shows on. There was a lot of music shows, you know, everything from Countdown. There was Flashes, there was GTK, Donnie Sutherland hosted one. Sounds Unlimited, that's right.
Happening 70.
And then there was also, you know, Paul Hogan show, the Don Lane show, the Midday show. There was all of these variety shows, and it's you know, part of television that's sort of virtually disappeared now, sadly. But you'd go on these shows as, you know, because you had a hit record, and quite often I would get asked, you know, if I wanted to be in a little sketch or a little skit on these shows, and so I'd say, yeah, sure. So I'd do a bit of that. And anyway, an agent, a woman by the name of Jane Cameron, rang me up, got in touch with me, and said she'd seen me doing these things, and did I have any interest in in doing any acting, and I said, yeah, sure. So that's how it started, and I started off in small roles in and working with other actors, learning their trade at the time. People like Mel Gibson and Sam Neill and Steve Bisley. They were all young guys around about my age, sometimes even a bit younger, and we were making these movies. It was part of a little renaissance in Australian filmmaking at the time. So there was, I think the first one I did was The Odd Angry Shot. I don't know whether you've ever seen it.
Yeah, certainly.
Graham Kennedy was in that, Brian Brown, John Jarrett, Graham Blundell, lots of great people. And I just had a small role in there playing a soldier, and in various movies. And then I started doing guest roles in a lot of the TV cop shows and dramas. And then in 1990, I won an award for a film called Return Home, which was shot in Adelaide, and with Ben Mendelsohn was in it with me. And then I started to take acting sort of seriously. And since then, I've done a lot of acting work in television. I did a show called Embassy, Round the Twist. A lot of people still remember.
Filmed at
that.
Birregurra, not far from Geelong. A bit of that was.
Yeah, and then Police Rescue. I did a couple of seasons of that, and I did. I have to think about it now. But yeah, it ended up. I did all the Neighbours and Prisoner and Special Squad and all of those cop shows, sort of doing an apprenticeship, and then it culminated in 6 wonderful years doing A Place to Call Home, which was just a great experience and a great thing to be part of.
And the thing I like about your character in that, and also the character that you played as the inspector or whoever it was in Underbelly, the original Underbelly series.
Underbelly.
Both of those were serious roles, and yet you can almost see every now and again you winking at the camera going, I'm Frankie J. Holden, don't you? There was just that, you know what I mean? It's just that something about those characters that were either written for you or you were written for them. I just found that really fascinating, that whenever you do an acting role, there's just that little bit of Frankie J. comes through.
Well, I don't know if that is a compliment.
I think it is.
But you can't help when you sure you're adopting another character, and that character's got its backstory and it's a different wardrobe and all of that. But you can't help but a little bit of yourself comes through, and in fact, it's meant to. You're meant to bring a little bit of yourself into everything that you do in that area. And if you watch a lot of anybody's work, you'll see they all have similar traits and little physical tics that they do a lot. It doesn't matter what character that they're playing. They always bring these little physical tics, and you sort of can't help it. Like, for example, Sean Connery, great actor that he was, and incredible screen presence, but he always just had the same voice. It didn't matter whether he was playing a Scotsman, an American, an Englishman, or a caveman, or a Nazi. He just still was Sean Connery. As soon as you heard the voice, you knew it was Sean. So that it's not a bad thing as long as you can see some semblance of another person in there.
No, it was not to be anything but a compliment, because a lot of actors that you see, they just look they're going through the motions a bit. And I just think that's as soon as I see you in a TV show, I'll generally watch it, because you bring it to life for me. I just think it's really good.
Well, that's very nice of you to say so.
Frankie, on the team thing, the old 55, you're all about fun, being silly. The sillier, the better at work, probably. But in an environment like creating a show like A Place to Call Home and a lot of those others that you mentioned, so it obviously has a really serious side. And we look at the two, excuse me, the two main characters, Noni Hazelhurst and Marta Dusseldorp, that look to be really serious, strong women. But in that, do you still get a chance to have that fun and frivolity that you did in old 55 behind the scenes?
Oh yeah, you have to. Yeah, oh absolutely. Well, when you're working on those things, you work really, really long hours, ridiculous hours, and you're working for, a long time. You're working with these people, the same people day in, day out. So you need to be able to have some fun when the cameras aren't rolling. That's an incredibly important part of it. And you need to, otherwise you just, particularly in those heavy dramatic things, or else you just get so exhausted, from concentrating and emoting, and it does take a lot of energy. So you need a break. So I'm still a show-off on set.
Yeah.
Just like I was in...
And I guess with Noni Hazelhurst doing so much work on Play School, where you'd have to be a little bit silly, she would probably have a pretty good sense of humour off camera.
Oh yeah, everybody's... But the other great thing, I've been blessed really with the way I've been able to eke out a career in show business, because, the old song, there's no people like show people, and that's generally true. They're basically still children.
Yep.
And they have a very strong creative urge, and they love to play and make things up, and have a similar sense of humour. So it's great fun to go on a film set or a TV drama set, even though, as I say, it is hard physical work, long hours, and you can be in the middle of winter. As we did in a place to call home. We shot it mostly outside of Camden, Campbelltown, southwest of Sydney. Very, very cold in the middle of winter. But if the script says, Roy, my character, goes into the river to collect the dead body or whatever it is, you have to go in there, and probably half a dozen times. And Martha Dusseldorf tells a good story about what it's like. At one point, her character, in a dream sequence or a nightmare revisited, her character is getting raped by these, German SS soldiers. So, and you can imagine what that's like, and it takes hours to shoot it. And so she's doing this big rape scene. It goes for hours and hours, and everybody's into it, and you have to sort of get into it to make it appear real. And then it's going well, and then the first assistant says, "Great, cut, we got it, that's lunch." So everybody just walks off the set, leaving Martha still in a crumpled heap, in the fetal position, having been raped for 4 hours. They just walk off and go to the lunch table. And she's expected to just pop up and go and have some lunch.
And then come back an hour later.
An hour later and do it again.
Yeah, and escape from a prison camp.
So it is a bit silly sometimes.
Frankie, we sadly have come to the time where we've got to say goodbye. Could we get you back another time? Would that be all right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Because we'd love to talk a bit about what you've done since then in terms of your caravan shows, and I would love to be able to ask, here's one to ponder for next time we get you back, maybe in a few months, but you met Graham Kennedy and you worked on a film with him. If I had tapped you on your shoulder and said, "Oh, by the way, you're going to take over IMT from him one day," I'd just love to know what sort of thing goes through your head when someone tells you that.
Oh, well, I wouldn't have believed it at the time. Before that, do you want to wrap it up now? Just tell you quickly. Yeah,
no, tell us that, and then we'll let you go, and we'll come back later in the year, maybe.
Okay. Well, I also worked at Channel 9 for a number of years as a producer. When I moved to Melbourne in 1981, and I got married, and we got pregnant very quickly. So there was a time when I thought, show business, the vagaries of show business might be too much. So I started work at Channel 9 through a contact that I had there, and do you remember the Daryl Summers show?
Oh yeah.
Which was a Tuesday night variety show that he had before Hey Hey went to night time. Anyway, I was associate producer on that, and I worked a lot on the midday show, and I produced a couple of carols by candlelights at the Myer Music Bowl. Anyway, I used to make jokes when I was doing the Daryl Summers show and the midday show amongst the production team. I used to say, "Don't worry, guys, it'll all be different when I'm hosting my own variety show." And everybody would laugh, and then, lo and behold, a few years later, I got the call to say, did I want to do exactly that? So there was a sort of a roundabout, symbiotic trip to make that happen. But, I'd really enjoyed that. It was 3 years. 3 years might not seem like a long time, but to hold a variety show together for 3 years is quite an achievement if you look at some of the people who've tried it and failed, who are very, very successful and talented.
Absolutely.
So, and then it was going really well, and then South Park, the television show South Park, came along and was a massive hit and drew all of our young audience away, and then the network said, "Oh, you're not pulling any youngies, so you've got to go." And then there was no variety on television for many years until, then Rove picked it up again, Rove McManus, and then Steve Vizard did his Tonight Show. But again, there's a vacuum there, I think, on television now for something like that.
Frankie,
show. Yeah.
One last quick question for you. In an industry that's probably really big on ego, is the fact that you are able to not take yourself too seriously being a big asset?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, you can't take yourself too seriously in any part of life, I don't think. It's, but particularly in show business, because there is a temptation to start to believe, the publicity and the hype. But you got to, you surround yourself with good people, and they quickly pull you back down to earth if that starts to happen to you. The other thing, of course, over such a long career I've had, you recognise there are highs and there are also lows, and you can be riding high one day and the next day you're just down in the dumps again. So there's no point in taking any of it too seriously, because it's all just been, I'll tell you, it's just been a tremendous joyride for me, the whole thing. I just feel very, very blessed to have had the career that I've had.
Well, if we took all the press seriously about us, Frankie, we wouldn't have a radio show. So thanks for joining us.
My advice to you two boys is, that's good advice. Don't take yourselves too seriously.
No, we'll try very hard not to. Frankie, it's been an absolute joy. I will get back to you later in the year if that's all right, and we'll have another chat, because it's just great to have people like you chatting to us, and I know our audience love people like you, so thanks for being part of it.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm doing Dennis Walter's Carols this year.
In Geelong?
In Geelong, in December.
We'll make sure you come into the studio on the day. There you go.
Okay. Or we'll talk beforehand, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, well, don't put it in your diary yet, but we'll talk to you later.
Okay, mate.
Thanks, Frankie. All the very best.
Thanks, mate.